Welcome to Season 2 of Ed Falco on the Air. In this episode, I'll be reading The Revenant, a story of mine that was originally published in the Southern Review and later included in the annual Pushcart Prize anthology and in Sabbath Night in the Church of the Piranha, my new and selected stories from Unbridled Books. The word revenant is often used synonymously with ghost, but it also can refer to someone who returns from the dead as a reanimated corpse. Or somewhat less commonly, it can refer to anyone who returns from a long absence. You'll have to decide for yourself how I'm using it in this story about a veteran of the war in Vietnam who takes his teenage daughter to a Marilyn Manson concert, where a string of disturbing events begin, events that take him on a journey through memory and a tattered world, a world that changes for him on a balcony overlooking the city of Atlanta. First, a teenage girl flashed me at a Marilyn Manson concert. I had only reluctantly agreed to take V, my 14-year-old daughter, because I didn't want to spring for a pair of $25 tickets and take her to the Civic Center way over in Roanoke for the concert. I didn't know much about her music, but I knew enough that there was no way I was going to let her go alone, and it was either let her go or tie her down. So I found myself at a Marilyn Manson concert, and while I was there among several hundred tough guy teens waiting for the concert to begin, this girl flashed me. She couldn't have been more than 15. She wore a bright red choker. I was standing several feet away from V at the outer edge of a crowd that thickened into a knot of bodies near the front of the stage, which appeared to be about a mile and a half away. I must have looked like a security guard or a bouncer, standing rigid with my arms crossed over my chest, watching the crowd intently, my eyes going back and forth from V to the intermittent spectacle of someone lifted up over the throng and passed along on waves of hands until he or she fell, usually head first, into a gap in the tight surface of the bodies. I'm 6'3", 280 pounds, built solid. I've always worked out since I was a boy in Brooklyn and discovered I could avoid trouble if I looked like only a fool would mess with me. The kids, in general, were keeping their distance and looking elsewhere. Except for this one girl. She stood about 8 feet away, her back to the stage, and she looked right through me, the line of her vision crossing my body somewhere about neck level. The way her eyes were focused, it was like I wasn't there, though she couldn't help but see me. She was looking at me. She had short hair, a thin, attractive face, and a lanky body. No breasts to speak of. A black T-shirt with the word "whole" in plain white lettering enclosed in a white circle. Baggy pants she seemed to swim in. A dazed, "I'm not here" look in her eyes. She stood there silently, her hands thrust deep in the pockets of her baggy pants, and I stood there silently, my arms crossed over my chest. We were 2 points of silence in a mass of squeals and shouts that coalesced to a hollow din. I had just looked away from her, back toward V. I was feeling an uncomfortably familiar anxiety, one I hadn't felt in a while, but had felt almost every waking moment in Vietnam. A pervasive sense of danger somewhere within what I was seeing but invisible to me, as if the source of danger were going to suddenly materialize, and I had better be looking in the right place when it did. I couldn't quit staring, searching. When I turned my eyes back toward her, she pushed her baggy pants down to mid-thigh and pulled them up again quickly, and then just remained there staring through me with that lost look. It happened so fast, I wasn't sure it happened at all, but the image burned itself instantly into my permanent memory. She wore black panties that narrowed to strings across her hips and contrasted sharply with her fair skin. The triangle of black fabric was pulled to one side and ran in a dark line down the center of a sunny thatch of blonde hair. My mind reacted to the sight like a strip of film. She was both the camera snapping the picture and the picture itself. I registered the image, and it remains burned in place to this moment. I wondered if she expected me to do something. I had turned 50 the week before. She was a child. I looked into her eyes. Her gaze remained blank as she backed into the crowd and disappeared. V approached me. "Do you have to just stand there like this?" Her face was bunched tight with anger, her lips a thin line, her eyes squinting. "Deal's a deal," I said. We had agreed on everything beforehand. She could come to the concert as long as I came with her. She could stand with the crowd rather than sit in the stands as long as I was nearby and she stayed on the edge of the crowd. No going anywhere near the mosh pit. This was, after all, a band in which every performer was named after a serial killer. I said, "Just pretend I'm not here." "Right," she spit out and stomped away. A moment later, the lights went down and an evening of almost unbearable sound commenced. I couldn't believe the volume of the music. Literally, it was shocking. The sound pummeled me, every thump of the bass a jab to the body. Relentless, overwhelming sound. After 3 hours of it, I was exhausted and pissed off. When the lights finally went up and the general din resumed, I headed for the exits with V, who seemed to have forgotten momentarily how upset she was that I had insisted on taking her to the concert. She was pumped up with excitement, like all the other kids filing out of the Civic Center in a thick stream of dyed hair and pierced body parts. She floated along a few steps in front of me, and I could see her searching the crowd, hoping to find someone she knew, someone with whom she could share her excitement. Then, the next thing happened. First, there was the girl who flashed me, then this. A group of 3 guys and 1 girl came along walking in the opposite direction from the exiting crowd, and the girl recognized V. She squealed and took V by the hand and pulled her out of the line. The boys apparently didn't know V. They scowled and stood back from the girls and waited. I stepped out of the crowd, and one of the boys looked toward me and our eyes met. The girl was chattering about the concert and embracing V, who appeared slightly nervous and awkward. The boy said, "What are you looking at, fuckhead?" And then he spit on me. He might have been 16, maybe 17. A high school kid. He was scrawny, almost as tall as me, and like many of the boys that night, he was shirtless. He was built wiry and tight. I leaped forward, and the fool stepped into my punch. One instant, he was standing, full of himself. The next, he was out cold, on his back, bleeding from the nose and mouth. I grabbed V roughly by the arm and pulled her away. V never said a word to me that night. Nothing. In the car on the way home, she sat in the back seat, silent for the hour-long drive. I didn't ask her who the girl was. I didn't ask her anything. Something was going on. First, the girl flashed me. Then I knocked out a kid, a boy. And by the time I was sitting in the dark front seat of the car, driving home on a narrow country road under a bright full moon, I knew something was happening. When I first got back from Vietnam, I wasn't altogether, though nothing much happened to me there. Compared to some other guys, to most other guys, I was lucky. I saw some things, yes, and there were images that seemed to hunt me, stalking me and coming vividly to life when I least wanted to see them. The wrecked, bloody face of my lieutenant, the body of a young woman draped over a tree limb like an article of clothing hung to dry. She was naked. Something happened when I saw her. I came upon her in a small clearing, slanted lines of sunlight filtering through a porous roof of leaves. I walked right up to her. Her breasts were small, barely developed, the nipples puffy. I couldn't help looking at her, noticing the shapeliness of her calves and thighs, my eyes focusing a long moment on her sex. Her throat had been cut in a fat red line from shoulder to shoulder, and there was a circle on the ground where the dirt had soaked up her blood. And there were other things, other images. But it was 6 months maybe at the most that I was a mess before I got it together. I dealt with it. You can let things destroy you. You can let them eat you alive, or you can master them. You can command them, and you can get on with your life. I was 24 when I got home. I had been to college. I had a degree, useless granted, in anthropology, a no-name college. But I had finished. I had done my turn in the service. 6 months, maybe, I was a mess before I met June, my first wife, and I put my life together. I got a decent job with the phone company, which turned into a decent career. With June's work, we made enough money to get a nice house. We did okay. I did okay. The marriage didn't last, but I'm not alone there. At least we never had kids to make it more complicated. Those 6 months, though, it feels like I spent most of them driving. I couldn't get myself together. I just couldn't. Nights, I'd wake up at 4 a.m. every night, weeks in a row. Most nights, my stomach would be aching, a deep, generalized pain, a cramp that wouldn't let go. I'd take a shower and let the hot water run over my chest and stomach. I can see myself in that narrow shower box, which was lined with white tiles, and had a bright light that shined down into it so that my memory of it is this bright vision, my pink, naked body, the wide bulk of it leaning back, so that the top of my head touched the tiles, and the pulsing stream of hot water hit my stomach. I'd writhe under the water. It helped, but not enough. Eventually, I'd dry off and dress and get into the car and drive till the pain finally stopped, which usually took 3 or 4 hours. I drove thousands of miles that way. Thousands. After I married June, I never had another 4 a.m. stomach ache. They just stopped. I had gotten my life going again. I was back on track. Things went well with my job. I got raises and promotions. If I ask myself now whether I was happy then, I can't answer. I think I was happy. I know I wasn't tortured anymore by Vietnam, which I came to think of as a place where my life had gotten derailed for a brief time. I got past it. Even when June left me, I handled it okay. According to June, I was uncommunicative, unresponsive, an insensitive lover, and on and on. She lives in Washington State now. She's married again and has 2 boys. She sent me a picture once. Her husband wore a red ascot. But a couple of months after she left, I met Marcy, and everything was back on track again. The night of the concert, V fell asleep sobbing. Marcy and I could hear her from our bedroom, where we lay side by side in bed, rigid and awake, both of us looking up at the ceiling. V is our only child. Marcy couldn't believe I had knocked out a high school kid. You humiliated her, she had said when I told her. My stomach hurt. It was a warm night, mid-May. The windows were open. The ceiling fan revolved lethargically. Marcy lay beside me with her eyes open. She's a big woman, almost as tall as me. She's vulnerable and acutely sensitive at times, which is precisely how she doesn't look. She appears to be stern and angry, a disciplinarian, the 3rd grade teacher everyone hated. It's worry that makes her look this way. She worries about everything. When V finally stopped sobbing, Marcy said, "She just wants to be alive. She just wants to live her life." Really? I turned on my side and leaned close to her. "The kid spit on me," I said. "He spit on me." Marcy crossed her arms over her eyes. She turned away from me. I leaned over her, and I realized my hand was clenched into a fist. I wanted to hit her. I had never struck a woman in my life, and yet I knew what I was feeling. I wanted to grab her by the throat. I wanted to hurt her, and the desire to do so swelled within me like something wild that needed to be turned loose. I slid away from her. I got out of bed. I put on some clothes and went out the sliding glass door to our bedroom deck. The air was still. It was a little after 1 a.m. of Friday morning. Our deck looks out over a line of suburban backyards, maple trees, elms, basewoods, oaks, all surrounded by neatly mown grass, picket fences, red brick patios, and walkways. Our nearest neighbor had just put a stone bench under the oak in the center of his yard, with an in-ground light illuminating the area. All of the houses had sentry lights that stayed on all night, relegating the darkness to corners and the shadows of things. Most nights, I would have thought the view from my deck was peaceful and quiet, ordered and lovely. But that night, I found its stillness frightening. I was sweating, and I felt like I needed to run. I needed to get out of there. The stillness was suddenly somehow loud. The lack of movement felt like lack of air, felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't breathe right. I tried to laugh it off, but I found that my eyes were full of tears. I was crying. And I hadn't realized it. I don't have the words to explain the intensity of what I felt out there on the deck that night. It was as if this feeling had come out of nowhere, risen up out of the stillness, this terrifying sense, like fear multiplied and squared. I absolutely did not know what was happening. I thought for a moment that I might have been drugged, but the only thing I drank at the concert was a Pepsi, and that out of a can. The feeling was huge. It altered the world. I had the sense that everything I saw was painted on a canvas. The world itself was a painting on a canvas, and I could see it wavering. I could see the corners beginning to curl. I laughed. I wiped tears out of my eyes with the back of my hand. From inside, Marcy called my name. "Jeff," she said. "Jeffrey?" I went into the bedroom and knelt beside her. "You're crying," she said. She looked scared. "Why are you crying?" She wiped a tear off my cheek. "Listen," I said. "I'm going for a drive." "A drive?" She sat up. She looked startled. "It's 1 a.m. I explained as best I could. I told her something was happening. I didn't know what. I needed to get in the car and drive. She tried to dissuade me. She tried to get me back into bed. She wouldn't let go of my arm until I yanked it away from her. Then I took my wallet from the night table and the car keys from the hook by the kitchen window, and I drove away with Marcy standing in a pool of yellow light outside our front door, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Friday evening found me sleeping fitfully in an Atlanta hotel. I had driven through the night without much thought to where I was heading, and by the time the sun came up, I was in Georgia, following the signs to Atlanta. In the car, in the dark, driving in the company of massive tractor-trailers, I had cried for a few hours before falling into the soothing, hypnotic trance of long-term driving. I didn't know why I was crying. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just driving, moving. When the sun came up, I thought about stopping to call home, but I didn't know yet what I would say. I thought I might have had an anxiety attack out on the bedroom deck. I thought that might explain it. Something about the concert, the overwhelming noise, the girl dropping her pants, my hitting that kid, had brought it on. I needed to ride it out. I'd be fine. By the time I drove into Atlanta, I really was feeling a lot better, though still shaky. I got off on an exit that led to Spring Street, and Spring Street led to a parking lot, which led in turn to a high-rise hotel, where I checked in and took a room on the 21st floor. The key to my room was actually a card with a magnetic strip. When I slid it through a slot in the door handle, a green light came on, and the door unlocked. Inside, I found a massive bed and a writing table and a back wall that was all glass and led out to a narrow balcony overlooking the city. I stood out on the balcony a little while and gazed upon the cityscape, the intertwining strips of highway clogged with morning traffic, the array of tall buildings, including one structure that looked like a spaceship perched atop a column. It reminded me of something out of the Jetsons, a childhood cartoon show set in a futuristic city. I felt good out on the balcony, a dry morning breeze ruffling my hair. I was definitely feeling better. There was nothing of the panic from the night before. I went back inside and pulled the curtain over the window, darkening the room. I stripped out of my clothes and got into bed. In a few moments, I was sleeping. By the time I woke up, it was dark again, and when I pulled back the curtains, I found a nighttime panorama. The spaceship building was a soft blue circle surrounded by the glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline. Long lines of red and white tail and headlights moved along the highways. 21 floors up, the noise of the traffic was the principal sound, a loud, windy rush. As I stood out on the balcony watching and listening, I felt as though I were waking up from a very long sleep. And I was just waking up from several hours of restless sleep. But it felt like something more than that. It felt like Rip Van Winkle. I said aloud, Sleepy Hollow. Then I thought about Marcy and V, and for a moment I was out and out shocked at myself at what I'd done, getting in the car and driving away from them, abandoning them. What could they be thinking? I wondered if they might not have called the police by now. In 17 years of marriage, I had been a model of loyalty and faithfulness. And then I just up and disappear. What could they be thinking? What was I thinking? I went back into my room, sliding the glass door closed behind me, shutting out the traffic noise, and replacing it with the loud drone of a fan. I sat on the bed and picked up the phone, intending to call home, intending to apologize to Marcy, intending to explain that something had happened to me, something I didn't understand. I had panicked and fell back on the old habit of driving, and I had wound up here in Atlanta, in this hotel where I was calling from, and that everything would be okay, would be fine. I'd be home again in a few hours. I was sorry. I was very sorry. I picked up the phone and carefully read the directions. I punched 8 for an outside line, and then I hit 1, and then I entered my area code. And by the time I actually got to my number, I knew it wasn't over. Whatever it was that was happening, this wave that had picked me up and was carrying me along. I put the phone back in the cradle. I straightened myself out and left the room. Then I was back in my car and driving around downtown Atlanta. The evening was just beginning. Men and women strolled along Atlanta's city streets, looking like they weren't going anywhere in particular. I guessed because of the hour that most of them were heading to dinner somewhere, some restaurant. I drove around for a couple of hours just looking. At one point, I found myself driving through a series of poorly lit, empty streets, a place in the center of the city, but hidden away somehow. Useless realty, back streets, back entrances to buildings. I was driving slowly. I had been driving slowly all evening. I probably looked like I was cruising, looking for some action, because a man walked out of the shadows in front of the car and motioned for me to stop. He was dressed in beige pants with red shoes and a black shirt under a bright yellow jacket. He was an explosion of color walking out of the dark, and it wasn't hard to guess what he would offer if I stopped the car. Drugs or sex, sex or drugs. I didn't stop. I drove past him, and when I came to an entrance ramp, I took it. The highway was thick with traffic. I imagined someone looking down at me from their hotel balcony. Now I was one of the gliding lines of red and white lights. I drove for a half hour, 45 minutes, and then exited, meaning to turn around and head back to the city, maybe back to the hotel. I was thinking that I had to call Marcy. I had to at least let her know I was okay, even if I couldn't tell her what I was doing, because I didn't know myself yet. I could at least call her. I could at least try to explain. When I got off the highway, I drove by a shopping plaza where 2 police cars were parked with blue lights flashing in front of a long, windowless building that looked like a factory or a bowling alley. The parking lot in front of the building was crowded. Along the curb was a line of motorcycles. While I watched, the police car put 2 guys into the back of the car and drove away. A small group of young men dressed in tuxedos walked through a thick red door into the white building. Over the door, in red neon script, were the words, "The Gentleman's Club." I pulled into the lot. One of the tuxedos came back out and stood alongside the door with his arms crossed over his chest. I guessed it was a club with exotic dancers, girls who stood on your table and took off their clothes while you gawked. I wasn't sure, but I would have bet. Something about the atmosphere of the place. I could feel it. Why I pulled into the lot then, why I parked and got out of the car and started for the entrance, was a mystery to me. I wasn't especially interested in sex. I hadn't been in many years. In high school and college, I was interested enough. In those years in the late 60s, sex seemed like all anyone was interested in. It was as if the whole nation entered adolescence simultaneously. Sex this and sex that, on television and movies and books and magazines. I slept with several women then, though I couldn't recall many of the particulars. It had been almost 30 years. A couple of years into my first marriage, desire just about disappeared. June and I had sex maybe once every couple of months, and then it was fast, and as June loudly complained some years later, unsatisfying. With Marcy, the lack of much desire for sex was one of the things that made us compatible. Once V was born, we pretty much stopped. Ever since, it had been a once-in-a-blue-moon thing. So why was I stopping at a sex club? I didn't know. Best I could make out, it was like a wave I was riding, and that was where it took me. I walked past the guy in the tuxedo, who nodded pleasantly. I passed through the red door into a place that was like nothing I had ever seen before or have seen since. I felt as though I had walked through a crack in the culture's armor, and I wound up in a place where all the rules were in suspension. The place was Dionysian, Bacchanalian. Music screamed. Women stood on tabletops, naked or on their way to being naked. More women strutted around the bar room. In a far corner of the bar, elevated a few feet above the crowd, a black mechanical bull bucked and swayed, impaled on a silvery hydraulic tube, ridden by a woman dressed only in her skin and a mane of waist-length red hair that flew around her with the gyrations of the bull. When I first saw the bull and the woman, I stopped and gawked. I think my mouth might have actually been hanging open. While I watched, a boy climbed up on the platform and handed some bills to a guy in a tuxedo, and the bull stopped bucking for a moment while the boy climbed on and settled himself in the saddle. The dancer stood in front of him, grasping the pole in both hands, her feet wedged under the saddle, her waist at the level of the boy's head. A large group of young men around the bull began to yowl and hoot, and then the bull began to buck, tossing the boy forward and back. With each forward toss, the dancer thrust her pelvis toward the boy, who was pulled away from her by the motion of the bull. And with each backward toss, the boy would lunge for her sex, his mouth open, while she expertly kept herself inches away from him. The more the bull bucked, the louder the crowd yowled. I watched for a while, until the pure shock of what I was seeing dissipated. And then I made my way toward the bar, which was actually a dance stage where a woman was swinging on a trapeze suspended from the ceiling, taking off her clothes one article at a time and tossing them down onto the bartender to the amusement of the drinkers. I stood for several minutes behind a guy with a Semper Fidelis tattoo on his bicep until a waitress in a tuxedo jacket and a bikini bottom approached me and took my order for a drink. She explained that all the tables in the bar were currently occupied, but as soon as one of them was available, I could take a seat. A dancer would come and perform for me. Until then, I could stand and watch, or I could sit and watch. She pointed to a line of cushioned benches that ran along the wall of the barroom. When she walked away, I saw that she was wearing a thong. I watched her until she was out of sight, then carried my drink to the back of the room and took a seat on the bench. I observed the scene. Attractive young women walking around in various degrees of nakedness. Mostly very young men, boys really, shouting and waving bills at the women, who came to them and let them place the bills under garters. Naked women gyrating on tabletops, swinging from trapezes, riding mechanical bulls, with an attitude somewhere between numbed shock and amusement. I didn't know what I was doing there at the gentlemen's club. I was watching. I was having a drink. In a minute, I thought I'd get back in my car and drive back to the hotel, and I'd call Marcy and tell her I was coming home. I took a sip of my drink and was about to put it on the floor, slide it under the bench, and head out. And then I noticed that across from me, only maybe 10 feet away, where a dozen guys were sitting in a line on the bench, there was a waitress. I assumed she was a waitress because she was wearing the same tuxedo outfit as the girl from whom I had ordered my drink. She had a cute, girlish face with short, dark hair cut in a bob, and she sat on the bench with the line of men, chatting with the guy next to her. A girl dressed in jeans and a t-shirt sat on the floor at her feet, between her open legs. While the waitress chatted with the guys, the girl on the floor nuzzled between her legs. In the motion of the girl's head, she appeared to be licking the waitress. Every once in a while she'd stop, and she too would talk with the guy, as if she were taking a momentary break from what she was doing to throw in a few words of conversation. This was so strange, it shook me up. I began to feel frightened and anxious again, because I found it hard to believe that what I was watching was actually happening. Every once in a while, the waitress would close her eyes and throw her head back against the wall and hold the girl's head in her hands, pulling her deeper between her legs. This was in a crowded barroom. This was with scores of people milling around. Part of me just couldn't believe it was happening, and that part of me wanted to cross the room and touch them, just to see if they were real. Instead, I put my drink on the floor and walked casually out of the bar. Outside, I felt wildly disoriented. I stepped out into the spring air, out of the wailing music, and into the parking lot of a place that looked like any suburban mall anywhere in the world. And for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. And before it came back to me, Atlanta, the gentleman's club, the hotel, I was pale and sweaty and nauseous. In the car, back on the highway, the feeling evolved into fear as intense as it was back at home the night before out on my bedroom deck. Driving the car along the highway, my arms were stiff and my body was tight and cramped. I drove back to my room and got undressed and lay a long while naked under the covers. I was sweating. There was something physical going on inside me. I didn't know what it was. Outside, I could hear the sound of the traffic, like a reminder, you're in Atlanta, you're not home. And I'd have to think to remember how I got where I was. I felt as though I were coming apart. I felt as though something inside me was unraveling, something that had once been wound tight and secure. I lay in bed for hours, willing my mind blank, before the fear began to dissipate. It happened slowly. It ebbed out of me. It left me feeling opened up and vulnerable. I was wide awake. It was a little after 1 a.m. I told myself that I was having an episode of craziness. That was the only way to explain it. An episode of weirdness. I wished it weren't happening, but it was. I'd figure it out. I'd handle it. I'd ride it out. And then I'd get it together again, the way I always had, the way I knew I could. I kicked off the blankets and turned on the lights, and I was startled by the sight of my naked body stretched out on the bed. It must have been a very long time since I had looked at myself naked. I felt as though I were confronting a stranger. My body was pale and doughy, an unhealthy hue of white. I touched the soft mound of my belly and pushed my fingers down into the thick mat of hair that surrounded my penis. The room was brightly lit. The sheets were white. I touched my eyes and my temples and my cheeks as if I were a blind man trying to recognize someone. I touched my knees and my thighs and the place under my scrotum where my legs came together. I pushed one finger up between my buttocks, and then I held my scrotum in the palm of my hand, and my penis rose quickly, stiff and hard, and I looked at it swollen there against my stomach with something like a sense of wonder. I couldn't remember the last time I masturbated, not in years, many years. I sat up on the edge of the bed and pondered the possibility of masturbating like a man considering the terms of a difficult equation. And while I thought about it, the erection disappeared. I went out to the balcony. I stayed there a long time, naked, looking out over the city. It's awfully hard to explain this. I can't, really. It was like out there I was in a maze, and I was trying to find the right turn. It's like there was a problem set before me, and I was experimenting with solutions. Only I didn't understand the problem. I couldn't see the maze. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea why or what. People out of their minds talk about wires implanted in their heads, controlling them, making them do stuff. That's what it was like. I was not in control of myself. Things were moving me. I felt like a marionette. But in some way, I knew that I myself was the hand pulling the strings, making myself move. I went into the room, and the way I remember what happened next is this. I sat on the bed, intending to call Marcy, to call home. I hesitated, trying to figure out what I would say, how I would explain myself to Marcy and V. And while I was hesitating, I pulled out the night table drawer, where there was a thick phone book, a Yellow Pages. I took it out and opened it at random and found myself looking through several pages of advertisements for escort services. Now, this seems hard to believe. The way so much of what happened seems incredible to me now. But that's how I remember it. I opened the Yellow Pages, and I was looking at ads for escort services. The one I called wanted to know where I needed an escort at 3 a.m. I said it was a private party. I said it was in my hotel room. When she asked what kind of an escort I wanted, I said young. When she asked how she should dress, I said casual. I said jeans and a t-shirt would do. I said thin is preferable. I said she doesn't have to have much in the way of breasts. She laughed. There's a switch, she said. Then we worked out the payment. I gave her my credit card number over the phone. When I hung up, I went back out on the balcony. I didn't bother to get dressed, and a half hour later my escort arrived. I opened the door in response to her knock. I was still naked. She took one look at me, and a smirk crossed her face. She made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh and sauntered past me into the room. She said, "Not much for formalities, are you?" She gestured toward the door, which I was holding open, and the look on her face said, "Well, are you going to close it?" I closed the door and leaned back against it, and for a moment we both just looked each other over. I asked for young, and they sent young. She looked to be a girl in her late 20s. She was small, maybe 5'3", 5'4" at the most, with heavy, round breasts that pushed against the fabric of a black, official Disney World Minnie Mouse t-shirt. Minnie was pictured in bright red and white, with her arms akimbo and a look of reproach on her face. There was a caption. I forget what it said. At first I was upset about the size of her breasts, but it passed. I cleared my throat. I didn't know what to say. I was standing there naked in front of a stranger, and I remember that I didn't feel awkward at all. I looked into her eyes. She had a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't marred by toughness, by an orneriness that made her look as though she might turn her head and spit on the floor at any moment. She had short black hair that lay flat over her forehead and angled down toward the back of her neck, barely covering her ears. She had dark eyes and a round face. She stood with her arms crossed under her breasts and one knee bent, adding to her, "I'm tough, I've seen everything look." All she needed was a toothpick between her teeth to complete the image. "Well," she said, her voice gentler than her appearance, "at least I know you're not a cop." She had a southern accent. I couldn't tell if she were putting it on or not. She said, "Where are you from, honey?" She sat on the bed and started to take off her shoes, which were sneakers, white Nikes. When I didn't answer, she went on, "You know," she said, "what you want will be another $250 in cash. That's over what you've already paid." She paused then, watching me, one leg crossed over the other, holding a sneaker dangling from her finger by its heel. I said, "What is it I want?" I thought she might actually know something I didn't. She made that laugh snort sound again. She said, "You have the money, darling? It has to be cash." I shook my head. I didn't. I didn't have anywhere near $250 in cash. She put her sneaker back on. She said, "Well, you better get dressed then. For what you paid, I'll go have a cup of coffee with you, that's all." "That's okay," I said. "You can go. I don't know why I called." She looked perplexed. "Honey," she said, "you're stark raving naked. Why do you think you called?" "I don't know," I said. "You can just go ahead and go." I walked past her toward the balcony. When I slid open the glass door, she said, "Wait," and she got up from the bed and touched my arm. I stopped. I stood in the open door to the balcony with a breeze blowing comfortably against my bare skin. "What?" I said. "You can go. I'm sorry I called. Honestly, I don't know why I did." I covered my eyes with my hands. I sighed. "I'm out of my mind," I said. "I'm having some kind of period of craziness or something." I rubbed my eyes. "You can go," I said. "Really, I'm sorry." She stepped back and looked me over. She seemed partly annoyed and partly troubled. She said, do you like women to see you naked?" I shook my head. "I didn't think so." She looked down. "You don't appear especially excited." "Go ahead and go," I said. "I'm sorry." I looked down at myself. "I'm sorry I'm naked," I said. I gestured toward the door, and then I turned my back on her and went out on the balcony. I stepped up to the railing. I grasped the wrought iron in my hands. I was looking down at the moving lines of red and white lights. I looked down directly below me at an empty side street, dark in the moonlight. She came out on the balcony behind me. She took my arm in her hand and pulled me toward her, turning me around to face her. She lost the southern accent. "Honey," she said, "you're not going to do anything crazy, are you?" She said, "You're not thinking about jumping or anything, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm not thinking about jumping," my voice shaky. She took my arm. She touched me gently. "What is it with men?" she said. "What happens to you guys?" She touched my cheek. "Come here," she said. She stepped into me. She put one of my hands on her back and held it there. She put my other arm around her shoulder. "Dance with me a while," she said. "It'll make you feel better." She pressed her cheek against my chest. She held me in her arms, and her body began to sway a little, moving gently side to side. I only resisted for a moment. Then I leaned into her. "I like dancing," she whispered. She touched the back of my neck with her fingertips. "Dancing always makes me feel better." I tried to say something in response, but it took me a while before I could talk. "That's okay," she said. "Just dance with me." I did. I danced with her an hour or more, silent at first, but then talking a bit back and forth. By the time she finally left, the Atlanta night was fading into paleness. The outlines of the buildings were emerging out of the dark. She told me her name was Sally. She told me she had 2 children, the first when she was 14. She told me that she loved dancing, just standing someplace alone and swaying to whatever music she could conjure. Something about it, she said. After she left, I got in bed and fell asleep soundly. When I finally got home, no one was there. I had driven back to Virginia through downpours and thunder. Somewhere in North Carolina, with dusk coming on, I saw a lightning bolt hit a telephone pole, sending pieces of a transformer sailing in flames. By the time I pulled up in front of my house, it was late, and there hadn't been a storm for a while, but the wind was still gusting the way it does in thunderstorms, quiet for a time, then building and building right to the edge of being frightening. It didn't take me a second to figure out no one was home. There were no lights on. The driveway was empty. I had taken off and disappeared for some 36 hours without so much as a phone call. I figured Marcy was in Alexandria with her sister. I could see her there, sitting at the kitchen table with her sister and her sister's husband and her parents who lived nearby, and maybe even her sister's husband's parents who lived 2 houses over. They were all very close. We had all once been close. I imagined them sitting around the kitchen table talking, a family conference, a proffering of support and love. V would be upstairs with her cousin. There'd be music on. She'd probably still be talking about the concert. Once inside, I wandered through the house a while, going from room to room, picking up things here and there, a knick-knack, a picture, a book, and looking it over as if it held a secret I had forgotten. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge and rummaged through it, rearranging bottles and red and blue food containers. I found an unopened plastic container of bottled water. I held it over my lips and squeezed it, shooting a line of spring water into the back of my mouth. It tasted good. I took another long drink and carried the bottle with me up to my bedroom, where I sat on the bed and noticed for the first time the envelope lying on my pillow. It was beige, same color as the bedspread. It blended in. Had I turned on the lights, I would have seen it right away, but I hadn't. The house was mostly dark. I didn't open the envelope right away. I knew there would be a letter inside. I figured I knew most of what it would say. As soon as I walked into the house, I knew that everything had changed. I could feel it, like an emptiness. In one sense, it was sudden. In another, it was a long time coming. I went out on the balcony and stood in the gusting wind. I left the door open and the wind blew into the house. I could hear curtains rustling. In another room, a door slammed. I was just beginning to have the faintest glimmer then of what was happening to me. Now that I've gone back over things many times, I have some better ideas. But then, out on the balcony, I was struggling. I felt as if I were closing in on something, as if the first pieces of a puzzle were about to fall into place. I knew it started with the concert, with the girl, and I reviewed what happened, picturing her, and it occurred to me then that I might have imagined the whole incident. Not imagined it, hallucinated it. Saw it, saw her vividly, though she wasn't there. Not in the sense that others could see her. Think of it. Think of what I saw. A 15-year-old girl dropping her pants on a crowded concert floor. Would I have been the only one to see? Wouldn't there have been some comment? It occurred to me then that she might not exist at all, that I might have created her, though I can still see her image vividly. She was like a switch that turned on the whole episode. It occurred to me then that I might have taken down that girl from her tree in Vietnam, clothed and altered her, and placed her among the concert crowd. She would have been the right age. I thought maybe 25 years earlier, her naked body was like a switch that turned off something inside me. Maybe. I thought 25 years later, she returned. I'd believe she were a ghost, if I believed in ghosts, which I don't. But if I did, I'd be convinced of it. Think of how silent she was. Her small breasts, the red necklace, like the tattoo of a wound. That night, out on the balcony, I thought back to Vietnam. I wanted to push the notion out of my mind, and for a time that night I did. I got rid of it. It was a crazy idea. I had nothing to do with that girl's body winding up draped over a tree limb, or no more at least than anyone else who was alive at that time. As far as what happened to her was concerned, I might as well have not been there. I might as well have been protesting the war in front of the Pentagon. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't there when it happened. I had no idea who did it or why. It was just something I saw. I was on patrol and I saw it, and that was all. I had no more direct involvement than some hippie in San Francisco, some priest in New York, anyone who was alive in 1969, anyone who's ever paid taxes or shopped in a supermarket or laid down $50 for a pair of jeans. I would have stopped it if I could. I wasn't there when it happened. It was just something I saw passing by. But seeing it did something to me. That much 25 years later was clear. That much out on the balcony that night I accepted. It was like the first piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. I'm still working on it. It's a puzzle about the body. My body. That girl's body. There's a connection. It's not about guilt or responsibility, though that's there. That's one of the pieces. But it's something different. It's something more. My hand and hers. My throat and her throat. Our bodies. The music did something to me. The volume and intensity. The violence did something. My punching that boy. I didn't understand then. I still don't entirely now. But that night in my empty house, when I first realized I might have hallucinated the girl at the concert, it was electric. Sparks were snapping inside me. The wind gusted, blew through the house. For a moment, I sensed the beginning of fear. It was like a fist closing around my heart. Instead of running, I let my body rock a little bit. I let it sway. That helped. That made things better. In Atlanta, out on the balcony, while I danced with Sally, the city blazed around us, the blue light on the skyline turning lazily, the red lights of the cars merging into a glistening line that looped and spun. When we turned, the stars and the moon whirled. At one point in our dancing, I pressed my lips to Sally's hair and whispered that I loved her. It was crazy. I knew it. Immediately I said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She rubbed my back. She kept dancing. She said, "It's okay. Really, it's okay." She kissed my chest. I held to her. I held her tightly and I blessed her. I blessed her and begged her forgiveness, holding her tightly as we danced. That was The Revenant. And yes, in this story, I imagine a particular Vietnam veteran. But for me, at least, as I say in the penultimate paragraph, it's also about, quote, some hippie in San Francisco, some priest in New York, anyone who was alive in 1969, anyone who's ever paid taxes or shopped in a supermarket or laid down $50 for a pair of jeans, end quote. It's about all of us. It's about one particular war, and it's about all wars. As I've said before, if you have a comment on this or any story I've read in this podcast, you can contact me at falco.ed@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and please come back next week when I'll read Steve Gibson's short story, Dooley's Gill and Tavern, originally published in 5 Points and reprinted in High Five, an anthology of short stories from 10 years of 5 Points, from Carolyn Graff. Till then, be well, take good care.